Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin from MikeLevinSEO.com, and we are here in the home directory of my Raspberry Pi, where, if you'll recall, I have two projects going on. The first is where I'm hosting MikeLevinSEO.com using PyGreen and Flask as my web publishing framework. And then the Pipulate project, where it's this large open source GitHub project that I've been making these videos for. It's up over 50 videos now, and the payoff is starting to show, where I can go Python Pipulate, and as I said last time, keep your eyes on the question marks, and you will see the output from function 1 and function 2 replace the question marks that were here. So hello and world were the input parameters. You can see that if I were to vim pipulate, jump to the bottom, here's function 2 that takes param 1 and param 2 as input, and simply outputs them appended together or concatenated. That's where hello world becomes hello world as one string, and spam and eggs does the same thing. And now the trick of today's video, and I'll probably be doing a lot of pausing because there's a fair amount of discovery to do, is to actually eliminate the need to type Python Pipulate to do the question mark replacement. It's like, huh? Well, as you'll recall, the MLSEO or MikeLevinSEO.com project runs Python code from a web server context. So I should be able to just hit a website and have the equivalent of running that code and get the question mark replacements. Now I use something called PyGreen, which gives you a very PHP-like environment for Python. And I don't want PyGreen this time, and I'm not going to mix these two projects together. They're separate projects in GitHub. You can see my Vim code going into Control Option Z. That's what I'm trying to undo. Okay. Quit out of that, and I'm going to keep them as distinctly separate projects. There's hosting my website, which is going to give a lot of brochureware features, and then there's Pipulate, which is just to host that bookmarklet project that you might recall from ages ago. Sometime in August, I showed that there's a bookmarklet project coming. It was designed for collecting data off of websites. That'll still happen. It dovetails with Pipulate, but initially it's just to call a Python program. Now I'm not using PyGreen, so what am I going to be using? Well, first of all, before I even discuss that, I'm going to have two websites I'm hosting on the Raspberry Pi. And you may recall that when you visit MikeLevinSEO.com, that's being hosted right here on this Raspberry Pi that sits on my desk. That's right. And now I need to host two websites off of that. And you'll see here from my Verizon router rules, all traffic coming in over port 80 is being sent to my Raspberry Pi. All traffic coming in over SSH for remote website maintenance, also to the Raspberry Pi. But here I just selected from the options HTTP secondary, and secondary is, I guess, Verizon's nomenclature for port 8080, and I am going to add that rule. Now, any traffic coming in I have two routes in essentially to the web server. One which is to MikeLevinSEO.com, and now I can also do it to port 8080 where there is no website currently. But I can put my Pipulate site there. And it'll probably, I won't use the Pipulate domain, I'm just going to go with what's resolving there. This domain is already resolving to the Raspberry Pi, so I'll just, run another Python task, and I'll have Python running as a web server twice. And I'll be using a family of programs. I will be using Flask, but Flask glues a bunch of stuff together to give you a web framework that I don't really need. The one part that I do need is called Werkzeug, apparently, and that gives you a lot of similar features. You can see the routing and stuff here, just like Flask. Flask also gives you the Jinja2 templates, which is what starts to knit it together into a PHP-like environment, which I don't need. So I probably have the option here of just using Werkzeug, but all the documentation out there is for Flask. And I'll eventually be adding the requests object as well to make making web requests easier from Python. And these three things kind of live together as a family. I believe these people know each other, they're using common components, and Python doesn't have one preeminent hosting environment for servers the way like JavaScript has Node.js. It's so easy to create frameworks in Python. There's a whole bunch of competing ones, and so long as they agree upon a standard called WSGI, the code that you write is mostly transferable between them as far as functions and interacting with request objects and response objects, that sort of thing. And I am really interested in this hello world now in the directory where I am running Pipulate to see if I can serve a single file to show up here. That's what this video is for. So we take that hello world, we copy it, and we notice that all we're going to be doing is python space hello.py after the file exists. We don't have to install Flask because that was one of the requirements of Pygreen earlier on. So all I'm doing is cd into Pipulate, ls, I'm going to vim hello.py, colon paste, or set paste, so indents don't get messed up, I for insert mode, paste the Flask hello world in there, save, drop out to the shell, python hello.py, now I should have two websites running from Python. Running on port 5000. I have to Control-C out of that. I need to understand how to run it on a port. So I will search on ports. Okay. Flask port 8080. We have to make the following change to the code. Just put port 8080 in where app.run is invoked. That should do it. Maybe. Let us find out. That looks more like it. That will be this tab. Website denied. Very likely it's because I failed to put the host in there. I put the port, but this documentation here talks about a host. So I will put in like levinseo.com. Didn't like that. Cannot assign requested address. Publicly available. The joys of doing development work out in the open. Looks very promising. Bingo! We are now running 2 websites off of a single Raspberry Pi with nothing more than Python as the web server. There's no nginx, there's no Apache. This is just 2 separate Python tasks, one running automatically via Linux daemon-like technology at startup, and the other that I deliberately triggered off with a Python command from the console. And one is on port 80 and the other is on port 8080. So this is pretty much success assured that I'll be able to make one into the normal website and the other into handling the bookmarklet. Thanks for joining me, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.